Welcome to Beyond Bitcoin, a podcast about all things digital assets, the global communities they are creating, the generations that are using and investing in them, and the challenges faced by the nations that are seeking to regulate them. The content of this program is not to be taken as investment advice. The opinions expressed in the program by the host and the guests are their personal opinions only. Remember, feel free to subscribe and share with like-minded friends. My name is Deryck. I'm the CEO of Portal Asset Management, and my co-host is Nitin Gaur, Managing Director of State Street Digital Assets. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome along to another episode of Beyond Bitcoin. My name is Deryck, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Nitin Gaur. Nitin, how are you?
Hey, Deryck. I'm good. Good to see you again. And I believe you're now in a different part of Asia than you were last week when we spoke. So tell us where you are and what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I'm in Singapore today, and I'll be here for the rest of the week. The team at Hedge Weekly have kindly invited me to speak at their opening panel relating to the tokenization of real-world assets, which of course is a very hot topic at the moment. And the Hedge Weekly is a great organization because they bring together hedge fund managers with a focus this time around digital assets. And that means I get to see, my friends and brethren in this space, and Portal Asset Management gets an opportunity to talk about what their belief of the path forward is for the space. And I get to learn about what other people are thinking also in regards to hedge funds. So this is very good that such a group consistently brings forward, thought leadership in this area for hedge funds versus venture capitalists. And so, it'll be interesting. And at the same time, I've been asked to do an educational piece on tokenization of real estate here, which is really not what we do, but it is an interesting area, so it's worth doing. I wonder, Nitin, whether a lot of people are thinking that digital assets, crypto assets, have arrived at their destination, as if to think the tokenization of real world assets is the destination of this technology. I've got to say, I don't think it is. I just think if we're on a train line, it's merely a stop at a station as it keeps going and it gains momentum behind it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is the conversation we left off last time, Deryck. This is all the conversation we were having at Chainlink is, what are we doing? Where are we in this journey? And what is the real destination? And I consistently were asked this question in many conversations over wine and over sort of sidebar conversation, Deryck. And first of all, I would reiterate that some of the announcements at Chainlink was simply phenomenal in the same context of bridging the gap between the crypto ecosystem and the traditional world ecosystem. And one way to do that is to tokenization of real world assets, but also the other way is to be able to merge the older and with the new, as a primary conversation. So I think the destination to me is when we begin to see, and this is something which Vitalik brought up in one of the things when we had the last crisis, crypto crisis, this is pre-FTX issues, is have we really achieved economic inclusion? Have we really achieved a faster payment through crypto ecosystem? Have we achieved the affordability of assets, reduction and lowering the barriers to entry from the emerging economies into the overall Western hemisphere or the assets and vice versa. Until we get to that point, I think it'll still be a continuous journey. It'll be a continuum. And you're in Singapore, which means that it's probably one of the few jurisdictions, Deryck, if you get a chance to meet MAS and look at their sort of thinking and what they have done to energize the ecosystem. MAS done from Project Ubin to Project Guardian to Mariana. There have been many such projects that they have done to promote the efficacy of technology. And I'm not saying efficiency, because efficiency is something to make cheaper, faster, better, but efficacy is the right adequate use of resources to achieve the end goal. In this case, where they're saying, yes, it's going to cost us some money, it's going to cost us resources, but we have to continue doing experiments so we can understand to have much more favorable regulation than passing regulation for regulation's sakes. So they've taken some of these sort of automated market maker protocols or DeFi protocols and had controlled experiments to see what they can do with the real world assets. So as you're describing your journey, Deryck, when you're tokenizing real world assets, can we subject them to the same level of efficiency and transparency that we do with, let's say, Uniswap or Aave for borrowing and lending, for giving us, exchanges which is not the case today. You can't really go to an exchange to sell your house. You need to find a buyer. There's a whole, ecosystem of brokers and sellers, and there's a cost associated with it. I think that to me is the end goal. So I'll stop here, Deryck, and see if that resonates.
It does. And also, I had a great opportunity last night to catch up with a very active member in Singapore, Charu Sethi, which,
Charu,
of course, yeah, Charu. And she was on our podcast way back, nearly 200 episodes ago. And
she's amazing. We should bring her back, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we should bring her back. You're absolutely right. And of course, she's been really active in this realm of Polkadot and non-fungible tokens. And we discussed, amongst many things, 2.5-hour dinner that went in a blink. We discussed, are NFTs just finished? Should we just change the name of NFTs? Are all the functions and opportunities that non-fungible tokens were creating around the building of communities around artists and creators and things like that, a real sort of the beckoning of Web 3.0? Is it just suddenly gone? And the answer to that is, well, of course it hasn't. There's just a lull in the entire market sense at the moment. And it's just there waiting for it to occur. And the other thing we spoke about too is the fact that we have to realize, and I'm hoping not far away, we might get our young friend that we met at the last conference here. We're chasing him down, and he's 14 years of age and very active in this space, because Nitin, he's the user of the future non-fungible tokens. He's the guy.
Do we need a clearance? He's minor. Do we need any sort of clearance to get him on the show? Or this is all.
Yeah, I look. My VA is handling it all, and she's talking to him, and then hopefully we'll get an AOK from the dad. And once we've got all of that, then he'll be on. We hope.
That's
but
brilliant.
The point is that he is the user of non-fungible tokens. He's the one that's in the Web3 environment. He's the one that's going to build around communities. He's the one that's building this NFT world. It's not me. Although I love the concept of it, it's not me. And it's not that age group. So we've got to realize when we look at this space, we often think, it's not just today or the next 6 months. It's the generation that's coming. The Generation C, sometimes referred to as being the crypto generation, or Gen Z, that's coming to use it. And of course, we also spoke about the fact that the market has dropped away in regards to incoming investment funds, and something you and I are going to talk about a bit today too.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Deryck, I have spent some time. You use the word lull. That's exactly what it is, in the sense that if you look at, I've looked at the geopolitical turmoils. I've looked at global macro situation, which is there's a bunch of reports that we have this week from Bank of America and JP Morgan analysts talking about the relationship between, which we have done as well on this podcast, is relationship between stablecoin, which sort of inherits some of the global macro strengths and weaknesses, bringing into crypto because it becomes a primary medium of exchange. So liquidity comes in when you have easy money, monetary policies, and liquidity leaves when monetary tightening happens, which is what we've seen over time. But this week I spent more time, Deryck, in looking into what's happening with bond oversales, what's happening with sort of, Bitcoin halving. And I've always believed that Bitcoin and Ether both represent a benchmark asset and address different spectrum of crypto asset classes, and are structurally important, in my opinion. I'll say it again, Bitcoin and Ether are structurally important for crypto markets. And I begin to look at some of these nuggets of, stuff that's happening in Ukraine, and now the war in the Middle East, and India-Canada challenges, US-China economic tension, the global macro situation. And it's just been, all these actually have, interestingly enough, crypto has been a lot less volatile. There was a report by Kaiko. And that, to me, suggests that the asset class is either reaching maturity, which, to your point, are we there yet? And if it's reached maturity, then
that's right.
What the hell? What the hell is that what we are here for? Or experiencing a dampened activity, which is what my hope is. That I don't think by any means the asset is mature. I don't think we want the asset to mature. You could relate this to a dampened activity or reduced demand for all the global macro and geopolitical reasons than these things. So we should dive into it, because I think it's an important part, and love to hear what you're hearing at the Hedge Week, especially from a hedge fund perspective, as we've known that a lot of funding has dried up in VC funds as well.
Yes, that's right. And at the same time, there's these counter discussions that are going, these sort of counter arguments, counter views, where we see, large purchases of Bitcoin from the
Yeah.
team at MicroStrategy, and they've purchased nearly 5,400 odd of these Bitcoin, and we've also seen slight increases in inflows into the hedge investment world since July, and some $78 million, but again dominated by Bitcoin, as if it. I wonder. I think the Bitcoin maximalists will be sort of saying, "I told you so. We're the only token," but I actually totally disagree with that. Bitcoin is digital gold, and digital gold
Yeah.
has a position to play in an economy, just like the economy that I'm looking at here in Singapore. Gold plays a role here, but it's not. It doesn't feed you. It doesn't run the businesses. It doesn't create the technology. It doesn't build the communities. It has a community, but it doesn't build all the communities. It's the likes of Ethereum and Polkadot that build communities. And so I just sense right now that the lull in the market is so great that these utility driven tokens that are actually builders of wealth and economies and
Yeah.
communities are just getting overlooked, and the focus is on Bitcoin. And we know that because
Yeah.
recently I read a stat saying that over 80% of all hedge funds in this space that have invested in this space have a large holding in Bitcoin and ETH, and sometimes just dominant holding in Bitcoin and ETH, which
Yeah.
means that there's very little holding in the remainder,
Of the
hundreds
market.
of
Yeah.
tokens. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right, Deryck. In fact, we ourselves, when we spoke last time, we looked at the top 30 or 40 different funds. This
Mm.
includes the Bitwise and the Vanik and all the sort of people who have also filed for ETFs. They all have their own sort of funds. Pantera Capital, for example, has their own fund. And if you look at many of these funds, Bitcoin and ETH are the lion's share, in some cases 80,
Yeah.
90%. And you have the other
Yep.
top 5, top 10, top 20, depending on if it's a 30 index or any of the other asset classes, represent a minority stake, 1 or 2%. And I'm just thinking, are we all sort of backing our fortune with two assets, where the
Yep.
industry is supposed to be reflective of a large asset? And one complaint I have with NFTs, which, as you know, Deryck, I've been talking about NFTs for about 8 years, so it's been
Mm.
this space for such a long time that NFT still has not delivered the IP value. We're looking at IP, right?
Mm.
Generally, the
Mm.
construct of this, the Bored Ape phenomenon to sort of Stoner Cats, which was a video, and gives you actual digital rights management to say if you have a token, you should be able to. I don't think NFTs have delivered any of that stuff. So perhaps when we bring Charu next time, we should probably get an update on the NFT ecosystem to say, hey, is that really delivering true value? Is it actually enabling artists? Is it enabling digital artists? Are they truly sort of fulfilling the promise that we had envisioned when NFTs were introduced, in terms of royalties, in terms of cutting out the middleman, having visibility of the utility of these NFTs? I think it'll be great to keep an eye on that
And I
from that
think
perspective.
the NFT reflection of its probably lack of utilization in comparison to what our aspirations were at this time in history, is reflected also in a lot of the utility tokens that have been created. Decentralized finance tokens are in
Sure.
operation and they're working, but they're not dominating the world's position. I wonder whether the attack on the asset class, the heavily regulation of the
Yeah.
asset class, is really playing a role all the way down to the tokenizing of a community that gets
Yeah.
engaged around an artist. And I think it has. I think the role that the SEC has played in attacking the community has been enormously detrimental to it. I don't think it'll stop it, and I think I think it'll just simply move the intellectual property and capabilities to other countries, as we talked about with Token 2049 and 10,000 people here in Singapore, and the buzz that was associated with that, and that work that's getting done here. What we're seeing is, at the moment, the intellectual property leaving the US and these areas that are forcing regulation upon it. I often reply back to Gary Gensler on the Twitter account. I can't help myself, Nitin. I'm sorry. I just can't. And I always send him little notes going, "Dear Gary, thank you so much for the good work you're doing. Here in Asia, it's booming. All of the technology is leaving America. And it's your great work that's doing it. And from Australia and Asia, we just want to send our thanks." so, you know,
No, I would say that Gary has probably pushed the industry to innovate and get creative to a breaking point. But history will tell us how much he's done. But I think he's done a lot for the industry to think and challenge the status quo. But one thing you're definitely right about, Deryck, is the crypto markets generally are and continue to be highly sensitive to the US regulatory developments, both positive and negative. So every time there's a bill that's passed, or like this week alone, as you know, we had this political debacle where the Speaker of the House, who's like number 3 in line in terms of hierarchy, was ousted, and they had an interim Speaker of the House, which both, entities are considered pro-crypto. So that has given the crypto markets a lift to say, hey, if all this becomes real, or if the entire messaging from the Congress to Gary Gensler to approve some of the ETFs, which was a lowest hanging fruit, those were the things that were positive. And of course, they're all negatives from regulatory perspective, or some of the other Congress. So that's one data point. Second data point, I think, is the institutions, the more traditional asset managers, the BlackRocks of the world, are exploring and engaging the entire element of ETF ecosystem. As you know, there are 37 spot ETFs applications, and some of them are futures. But they're exploring. They're not in this sort of all-in phase, if I can use that term. So, which means they're still hedging their bet against the regulatory sort of lack of clarity. And I think that's another area which I think is impacting the both VC and hedge fund drying up in resources. But we see some evidence where you are today, Southeast Asia and Singapore, leading edge, right? London is talking now about a lot of MiCA-like, which was passed in Europe, passing MiCA-like regulation in Europe. Dubai is emerging consistently. As you know, Token 49 is only now in Dubai and Singapore. So US is lagging behind the rest of the world. And the global markets that we operate in, especially with crypto, it's very easy to move fund talent allocation to the countries that are more receptive to this, so business can flourish, and at least they have some clarity on what they can do and what they cannot. So it's not just about tokens, Deryck. It's about sales and marketing and product and talent and technology. These are individuals and humans who are working on building these projects. It's about them too, right?
Correct.
So you're absolutely right about your observation, Deryck.
Yeah. The other thing is that, they say you build in a bear market. And that's what we're seeing around the place. The great companies are developing great solutions during this bear market period. We at Portal Asset Management, of course, have been, finishing off our 2-year development of Pathfinder, which is this extraordinary quant program analyzing the various tokenomics, macroeconomics, and essentially targeting, the best of investment tokens. And all of that works very well during this bear market. Our focus is on building things, and we're not the only one that's doing that. Last night talking with Charu, the focus of Polkadot is building. They're building the next platforms. They're trying to determine how to make the process of creating NFTs no longer technical, so that it becomes just a user methodology, and that people can get a good user experience out of it. I hope that we're seeing that in every company, but I certainly know that a lot of good companies that have got a possession of longevity here are able to focus their time and effort on building. And I know that's what you're doing too. And you're constantly building and learning, both with working with the regulators and building your connections through this period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I think the last week's event in Barcelona, Chainlink announced, of course, CCIP, which is a protocol that's trying to interoperate between the old world and the new world, the messaging and the tokenization world. They'll introduce a few things called Chainlink function or Chainlink automation. And the idea is you can trigger events. So you know how there are things happening in the real world with global macro. And so what I think, and we should probably bring Petros to expand on the genius of Pathfinder, which is trying to straddle between the global macro and crypto macro, which I think is just nothing short of brilliant, of the work that Petros has done, for you guys. I think we should bring him on at some point. But in the same thematic sense, Deryck, while you're crunching numbers and figuring out relationships and correlations between the intricate dance of monetary policy and liquidity patterns and market volatility, which is essentially global macro, and tying into the volatility in crypto space, that is truly data science and applying technology to understand and make sense of the world around it. Similarly, the builders is trying to figure out is, if you truly want to build a tokenized world, that has to coexist with the real world as is. So how do I provide the interconnectedness of events that happen in one world, and it reflects the event that should trigger in the other world? So if some events happen, whether it's weather patterns or whether it's insurance claims, can I do a payout because of those events? So some of these building that's happening is to bridge those gaps, which I think is very profound on the long run, Deryck, which will only make this industry better from a real world asset perspective as well, I think.
Yeah, no, totally agree. As someone said to me the other day, the future's so bright in this space, I have to wear sunglasses to work every day.
That's a good one.
And we shouldn't lose track of the fact that the future is extraordinary in this space, and there's no question that the tokenization of so many of these methodologies of bringing community together is going to cause quite a global disruption. The challenge on the way is that the big, the larger corporations and certainly the governments of the world have to work out how they can cope with what might be a sharing of power or an opening of opportunity for transactions to occur globally without them controlling it all. And that is a systems and processes that they've built over 100 years. And it's not going to suddenly disappear in the next 24 months, which is a pity. It'd be nice if some of it did. But in fact, you've often said, although the community is extraordinary, the community that is here in crypto, you can't transfer $468 trillion of assets onto a $1 trillion platform and expect it to work. It's not going to. It has to grow.
Sure. No, absolutely. And Deryck, even that industry, like even the crypto industry, which is dominated by Bitcoin and Ether, a lot of things happen, which I think we should observe and comment on it next week. That for the first time, or after a long time, Bitcoin has reached to its 50% dominance of the overall crypto market. So Ethereum, of course, have lost, and there have been a lot of reports again from traditional analysts, and we should dissect those and what it means for the industry. Some of these are significant movements, both for the upside for Bitcoin and downside for Ethereum. And there are reasons why these things are happening, especially if you start looking at, as you rightly suggested, that if Bitcoin is truly liquid gold or digital gold, then is that viewed as a true vehicle, as a store of value in this massive geopolitical turmoil that we're going through at the moment? Is that the reason that increases the demand? Or is the centralization of Ethereum that's causing sort of people to question its longevity? And so we should introspect these things, which again is the fun part of our job, to look into this, which they don't behave like traditional gold, traditional assets, because things change at a global level and they begin to behave differently, which I think makes it more fun and interesting to be in this space.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, what's happening with Ethereum is fascinating, and it's not quite to plan, is it, Nitin?
It's not, and we had talked about this pre-merge and pre-move to proof of stake, and what does it mean? I actually had opined aggressively on this at the risk of not being attacked by the maxi community who don't want to hear anything negative about a specific project, is to simple economics and how this will end from proof of work to proof of stake. And it'll only be interesting to see as to how that centralization, which technically doesn't change the behaviors of transaction per second and all the things that we look at from a mechanical transaction processing perspective, but it does risk the asset and the ecosystem that has been thriving, in terms of the fact that what happens when 2 of the 4 dominant stakers are impacted, whether it's government action or whether it's some sort of technical failure, that could risk the entire community. So I think it'll be a great textbook exercise to to look at the transition like countries go through, because we have equated these layer 1 protocols to nation state status at some point. So that'll be an interesting study as well, Deryck.
Yeah, very much so. All right. Well, look, I think there's so much more to see what's going to happen over the next week. I can't wait to maybe become a little disruptive. I'm not sure how Hedge Weekly goes. I just want to be able to share with them that tokenization of real world assets is another extraordinary chapter in this space, but it's just a chapter. It's not the destination. And I think there's tremendous opportunity to be had here. And I sense that is the space that the likes of BlackRock and Fidelity and FT are wanting to get involved with. Because if you can tokenize a whole lot of illiquid assets and trade them, these guys who are the intermediary traders should be hugely benefited from it. And I think that's why there's a lot of motivational discussion about tokenizing real world assets, because the centralized transactors of them will want to be there. But at the same time, if you've got a centralized exchange that's costing you X to transact from A to B, and you can run it on a decentralized exchange, a DEX, where you simply swap it instantly peer to peer, ultimately, those centralized exchanges may well face competitors in the form of algorithm-driven exchanges. So the whole process of tokenizing to centralized systems and then to decentralized systems, I think, is going to be a typical path of the evolution of efficiency and effectiveness of transacting assets. But again, this is the 5th asset class of the world now, the newest asset class in the world. It is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as it starts absorbing the tokenization of intellectual property and the tokenization of real world assets. So the future's so bright. I've got to wear sunglasses every day.
Sunglasses.
To come to work.
That's great, Deryck.
Thanks, Nitin.
All right. Take care. Good chatting, and see you next week.
Good on you. See you, Nitin. Bye for now.
All right.
We hope you enjoyed our weekly conversation. If you have any questions, comments, or suggested topics, please contact Nitin, Gaur, or myself on the emails displayed here or via our LinkedIn profiles. Feel free to subscribe and share with like-minded friends. Stay well, inquisitive, and engaged. See you next week.